The human heart is a curious architect. It drafts its blueprints not on pristine vellum, but on the palimpsest of childhood, etching its plans over the ghost words of every slight, every ignored triumph, every time it was told to be quieter, smaller, less. My name is Beverly Hart, and my heart learned to draw in the dim light of a tool shed, with the scent of rust and pine as my incense. I was 8 years old when I understood the fundamental principle of load-bearing, that some structures are designed to carry weight they were never meant to hold. Our family was such a structure, and my sister Chloe was the glittering, gilded ornament on its roof, while I was the unseen, concrete foundation buried in the dark, damp earth. My childhood was not loud with laughter, but quiet with observation. I became a scholar of the unspoken, a cartographer of the emotional landscape of our home. I mapped the fault lines in my parents' marriage, the subtle shifts in my father's affection that always tilted, like a poorly poured foundation, toward Chloe. I learned the acoustics of our house, the specific creak of the floorboard that meant my father was heading to the fridge for another beer, the particular pitch of my mother's sigh when I showed her a straight A report card, a sigh that said, "That's nice, dear," but meant, "Your sister has a recital tonight, so don't expect us to make a fuss." My sanctuary was the shed, a place of beautiful, honest logic. Wood was either sanded smooth or it was rough. A nail was either hammered straight or it was bent. There was no ambiguity, no favoritism. The laws of physics were impartial, unforgiving, and fair. I built my first table there. The legs were uneven, and it wobbled if you put a glass of water on it. But it was mine. I had taken raw, useless scraps and given them function, form. I showed it to my father, my heart a frantic bird in my chest. He was in his armchair, the blue glow of the television painting his face in weary shades. "What's that, Bev?" "A table," I said, my voice too small. "For what?" he asked, not unkindly, just distractedly. "For things," I whispered, the inadequacy of the word choking me. He nodded, his eyes already drifting back to the game. "It's a bit wobbly. You'll figure it out." And I did. I figured out that his approval was a currency I would never earn, so I stopped trying to spend it. I began building for an audience of one, myself. That wobbly table was my Declaration of Independence, written not on parchment, but in pine. It was the first line of a story only I could read, the first stroke of a blueprint for a life that would not be confined to the small, dark space they had assigned me. There is a particular silence that accompanies the realization that you are an afterthought. It's not a peaceful silence. It's the dense, heavy quiet of a door being closed in a distant room. A room you were never invited into. By high school, I had become fluent in this silence. I wore it like a coat. While Chloe's life was a riot of color and sound. Spangled costumes, roaring crowds, the dramatic tears and triumphs of adolescent stardom. Mine was a study in grayscale and quiet calculation. I found my language not in words, but in numbers. In the clean, elegant lines of a calculus equation. In the predictable certainty of physics. The world might be unfair, but the quadratic formula was not. Gravity did not play favorites. In my math teacher, Miss Alvarez, I found my first true witness. She was a small woman with a voice that could chip ice and eyes that saw straight through the quiet girl in the second row to the fierce, hungry mind within. Hart, she'd say, placing a complex problem on my desk. Solve this. And don't tell me you can't. I never did. One afternoon, she kept me after class. The room was empty, filled with the dust motes dancing in the late sun. You're wasting your time here, Beverly, she said, not cruelly, but with a terrifying directness. You have a mind for engineering. There's a program at the state university, a scholarship for women. You need to get out of this town. It was as if she had thrown me a rope while I was drowning in a sea of my family's indifference. I applied in secret, writing my essays at the kitchen table late at night. The only sound, the hum of the refrigerator, and the distant phantom echo of applause for Chloe. The acceptance letter was a thunderclap in my quiet life. I presented it to my parents with a trembling hand. My mother's face did a complex calculation of her own. Pride quickly eclipsed by practical concern. The university. But that's 3 hours away. Who will help with things? My father looked at the tuition line. We can't afford this, Bev. You know Chloe's. I cut him off, something I never did. It's a full scholarship. It's free. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was the silence of a paradigm shifting. They had no more excuses. Their neglect was now exposed, naked, and undeniable. My father cleared his throat. Well, if it's free. That was it. No celebration, no restaurant dinner, no balloons. Just if it's free. As I packed my single suitcase, I felt not sadness, but a terrifying, exhilarating sense of weightlessness. I was cutting my own gravitational pull. College wasn't just an education. It was my launch sequence. The world beyond my hometown was a shock to the system. A cacophony of new sounds, new faces, new ideas. My dorm room was a sterile box, but it was my box. For the first time, the space I occupied was mine alone. I was a tiny, insignificant fish in a vast academic ocean, and it was liberating. The hierarchy here was based on intellect and grit, not on who could sing the prettiest or smile the brightest. I was, once again, often the only woman in the room. But the dismissal of my male peers was a dull blade compared to the precise surgical neglect of my family. I could fight this. I could outstudy them, outcalculate them, outlast them. I joined the Society of Women Engineers, and in those rooms, I found my tribe. We were a quiet army. Our weapons were textbooks and graphing calculators. Our battle cry, the determined scratch of a pencil. We shared stories, not of parties and dates, but of being talked over in labs, of having our ideas credited to male partners, of the quiet, constant pressure to be twice as good for half the recognition. They taught me to armor myself in competence. Keep your drafts organized, a senior named Lena told me, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. Speak in meetings, even if your voice shakes. And for God's sake, put your name on every single thing you build. Don't make it easy for them to erase you. I took her words to heart. I became a machine of meticulous productivity. But in the quiet moments, in the deep of the night when the library was empty, and the only light was the lamp over my drafting table, a different kind of blueprint began to form. It wasn't for a bridge or a building. It was for a life. I wrote a list in the back of my notebook, a secret covenant with my future self. 1. Become a structural engineer. 2. Buy land by the ocean. 3. Build a house with a glass wall facing the sea. 4. Design a table with no head. 5. Invite everyone who was forgotten. It was a map out of the loneliness, a promise that the silence I was so accustomed to would one day be filled with the sound of my own choosing. The crash of waves, the murmur of conversation, the profound quiet of belonging. After college, the city welcomed me with its gritty embrace. I got a job at a firm, the only woman in the structural department. The professional world was a refined version of what I'd always known. I did the work. My male superiors took the credit. But now, it was a transaction. I traded my silence for a paycheck, and with that paycheck, I was buying my freedom, $1 at a time. I lived in a shoebox apartment with a fire escape that served as my balcony. I didn't care. Every project I worked on, every beam I calculated, every soil report I analyzed was another brick in the foundation of my future. I was no longer building for my parents' approval or for a professor's grade. I was building for the cliffside, for the glass wall, for the table. I started my own company, a terrifying leap that felt more like a homecoming. I hired people not based on pedigree, but on passion. Monica, whose sarcasm was a shield for a brilliant mind. Alex, who saw buildings as living, breathing things. Jamal, who could tame chaos with a spreadsheet. Together, we designed spaces that felt like the opposite of my childhood home. Open, light-filled, equitable. And then I found it. The land. A brutal, windswept slice of cliff that real estate agents had passed over for years. It was perfect. Standing there, with the Pacific wind trying to push me back, I felt a recognition deeper than any I had ever known. This land was me, stubborn, uncompromising, and waiting for the right architect to reveal its strength. The construction was a war, and I was a general in a hard hat. We battled mudslides, permit delays, and a hurricane-force storm that sent a wave crashing over the cliff face, soaking us to the bone and washing away a week's work. I didn't flinch. I stood there, salt water stinging my eyes, and laughed. Let it try. This house was being built to withstand. Every concrete pier sunk into the earth was a rebuttal to my father's indifference. Every sheet of hurricane-proof glass was a barrier against my mother's passive dismissal. This was more than a house. It was my soul, rendered in steel and glass, a monument to the fact that I had not just survived them. I had used the very materials of my neglect to build something unshakably beautiful. The night of the housewarming, the house was finally alive. It was no longer a structure of my imagination, but a living, breathing entity, pulsing with light and music and conversation. The long cedar table, the direct descendant of that first wobbly one from the shed, gleamed under the glow of candlelight. It was perfect, and it was filled. I had sent out the invitations like messages in bottles, cast into the sea of the forgotten. And they had come. Rachel, my childhood friend who moved away and was never mentioned. Eli, the quiet cousin who was gay and subsequently edited out of family photos. Aunt Marianne, who had divorced my uncle and thus divorced the entire family. They came, one by one, their eyes wide with wonder, not just at the house, but at the simple, profound act of being remembered. The air was thick with the aroma of good food and the sound of easy, unforced laughter. And then my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "So sorry, sweetie. Chloe's move was exhausting. We're going to have to skip it. Hope it's lovely." I read the words on the screen and I felt nothing. No stab of pain, no surge of anger. Just a quiet, profound certainty. I looked around the table, at the faces of my chosen family, their features softened by the candlelight, their stories weaving together into a tapestry of resilience and belonging. Their absence wasn't a wound. It was the space that had allowed this new, more beautiful world to rush in. Rachel stood and raised her glass. "To Beverly," she said, her voice clear and strong. For building a sanctuary for the unseen, for showing us that fairness isn't a concept, it's a structure. And for this table, which has no head, because here everyone is of equal importance. The clinking of glasses was a sweet, sharp music. In that moment, I understood the complete anatomy of my quiet revenge. It was never about them. It wasn't about making them see what they had missed. It was about me finally seeing myself. It was about building a table so grand, so solid, and so welcoming that their empty chairs were not a symbol of my loss, but a quiet, permanent testament to their choice to remain in the small, dark world they had built, while I had gone to the edge of the earth and built a kingdom of light. Success, when it finally comes to the patient, has a curious taste. It's not the sweet burst of victory you imagine as a child, but something richer, more complex, like a spice you've only read about, finally experienced. The HGTV episode aired, and my quiet world erupted. The phone, which had mostly been a conduit for contractors and clients, now rang with a new, insistent frequency. Producers, journalists, strangers who'd seen their own story reflected in my glass walls. The local grocery store became a place of stopped conversations and hesitant smiles. "You're the woman from TV," they'd say, their eyes holding a new kind of light, not the dismissive glance I was accustomed to, but one of recognition, of seeing. My inbox flooded with emails from young women, their words trembling with a familiar ache. "I'm the Beverly in my family," one wrote. "You made me believe I could build my own table too." This public acknowledgement was a strange, heady wine. It was vindication, yes, but it was also a weight. I had become a symbol, and symbols have responsibilities. My quiet revenge was now a conversation, and the world was listening. But the most telling reaction came from within my own family. My mother's calls took on a new, strained quality, laced with a pride that felt more like possession. "Everyone at the country club is talking about my daughter, the TV star," she said, the words "my daughter" suddenly heavy with emphasis. The narrative was shifting, and I held the pen. The little girl in the shed was now the woman in the magazine, and the foundation of the family's old story was showing cracks under the new weight of my success. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it does change the landscape around them, allowing for new paths to be forged. The reconciliation with my family was not a single dramatic event, but a series of small, awkward, and profoundly human encounters. It began with Chloe. We met in a neutral cafe. The air between us thick with unsaid things. She was thinner, the constant pressure of performance etched faintly around her eyes. "I watched your show," she started, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Not just once. I think I've watched it 5 times. She looked up, her gaze direct and unguarded for the first time in our lives. "I tried to watch it as you. I saw the text from Mom on the screen, and I remembered all the times I just took it for granted that you would be in the background. I never asked what it cost you." Her apology wasn't grand, but it was specific. and in its specificity, it was real. My father's turnaround was slower, expressed not in words but in actions. He showed up at the villa one Saturday, unannounced, his hands shoved in his pockets. He walked the perimeter in silence, occasionally kneeling to examine a joint, to run his thumb over a cedar beam. "The foundation is overkill," he grunted, standing beside me on the terrace. "Overkill keeps it standing in a storm," I replied. He nodded, a slow, conceding gesture. "You did good, Bev." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and from him, it was a seismic shift. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about forgetting the blueprint of the past. It's about deciding to build a new structure on the same land, one with better materials and a more equitable design. Legacy is not a monument you build for yourself, but a garden you plant for others. With the platform I had been given, I felt a deep, compelling pull to become the Ms. Alvarez for a new generation. I started a small, fiercely curated mentorship program, taking on 2 or 3 young women each year from non-traditional backgrounds. They came to the villa, their eyes wide with the same hungry light I recognized from my own youth. We would sit around the great table, and I would watch as their initial awe melted into the comfortable, focused energy of creators at work. I taught them what I knew about load distributions and soil mechanics, but more importantly, I taught them what I had learned: to trust the quiet voice, to put their name on their work, to build their own damn table. One of them, a fiercely intelligent girl named Maria, who'd been told her entire life that engineering was not for people like her, designed a stunning cantilever deck for her final project. When she presented the plans, her voice didn't shake once. Watching her, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any award or television spot. My quiet revenge was becoming a chorus, its melody picked up and carried forward by new voices, ensuring that the silence I had endured would not be a legacy I passed on, but a cycle I helped to break. The cliffside villa was my personal sanctuary, but my philosophy of functional equity demanded a broader canvas. My team and I embarked on our most ambitious project yet, a community center in a neglected part of the city. This would not be a building that imposed itself, but one that listened. We held town halls in church basements and community gardens, asking people what they needed, not telling them what they were getting. The design that emerged was a testament to collaborative creation. It had a central, circular common area, a literal round table for the community. The library had nooks for children to read in, but also well-lit tables for adults studying for their GEDs. The gym could be converted into a disaster relief center. Every material was chosen for its sustainability and low maintenance. This project was the antithesis of the isolated, celebrated genius. It was architecture as a verb, a process of building with people, not for them. The groundbreaking ceremony was not filled with dignitaries, but with the families who would use it. My quiet revenge had evolved. It was no longer just about building a space for myself, but about using my skills to deconstruct systems of inequity, one community center, one round table at a time. There is a profound intimacy in sitting inside a structure you designed while a storm tries its best to tear it down. The first true winter storm at the villa was a test of everything I had learned, everything I had built. The wind screamed like a living thing, hurling rain against the glass wall with the force of thrown stones. The waves below were not waves, but avalanches of water, crashing into the cliff with a sound that vibrated in my bones. I sat in the great room, all the lights off, and simply watched. I felt the house breathe around me, its deep piers holding firm in the chaotic earth, its steel frame flexing just enough, its glass trembling but not breaking. This was the final, ultimate validation. It was one thing to build a beautiful space for a sunny day. It was another to create a sanctuary that could stare into the heart of a storm and remain unshakably a sanctuary. In that roaring, elemental darkness, I felt no fear, only a deep, resonant peace. The little girl in the leaky shed had built a fortress that could withstand the fury of the world. The storm outside was nothing compared to the quiet storms I had already weathered within. All structures, no matter how well built, must eventually learn to stand without their original architect. I had built Hart Structural Solutions from a dream and a drafting table, and now it was time to ensure it would outlive me. I promoted Monica to CEO. She was more than ready, sharper, more business savvy, and just as committed to our core philosophy. The day I handed her the keys to the main office was one of the proudest of my life. It was not an ending, but a different kind of creation. The company was no longer my child that I had to nurture and protect. It was a thriving, independent entity, a force for good in the world that would continue its work long after I was gone. Stepping back, I didn't feel a sense of loss, but of profound completion. I had not just built a company. I had built an institution with a soul, and I was passing the torch to someone who would honor its flame. My legacy was no longer just in the buildings I had designed, but in the culture I had created. A culture that valued precision, equity, and the quiet strength of a job well done. Years have a way of softening edges, of blending the sharp colors of past pain into the softer hues of a life fully lived. The villa is no longer just my house. It is the heart of a sprawling, chosen family. On this particular summer afternoon, the property is alive with the sounds of my annual Festival of Tables. Chloe is here. Her daughter, my nimble, hilarious niece, is teaching a group of children how to do a plie on the grass. My father, older, slower, is in a deep debate with Jamal about the merits of different types of wood stain. My mother is showing Maria, my mentee, a photo album, pointing out pictures of me as a serious, quiet child. I stand at the edge of it all, watching the tapestry of connection I helped to weave. The long cedar table is laden with food, every chair filled. There is no head. There is only the center, and everyone is in it. The 8-year-old girl in the tool shed, sanding her lonely box, could never have imagined this panorama of belonging. She was just trying to build something that wouldn't wobble. And in the end, that's exactly what she did. She built a life that was steady, that was strong, that was hers. The quiet revenge was complete. It had not been an act of destruction, but the most profound act of creation, a world where she and everyone like her finally had a place at the table. The hammer is quiet now. The work is done. And it is good. They often ask me now to speak about my philosophy, as if I sat down one day and drafted a manifesto. But philosophies, like strong foundations, are not designed in a day. They are lived into existence. Mine was forged in the quiet. I have come to understand that silence is not an emptiness to be filled, but a space to be designed. In my youth, It was a silence of neglect, a void. But I learned to architect that void. I filled it with the sound of my own thinking, the rhythm of my own breath, the purpose of my own hands. My design principle, which academics now call functional equity, was born from this. It is the understanding that a space is not truly strong if it only serves the powerful, the loud. The central, true strength lies in the support of the periphery, in the grace that holds up the edges. A table with no head is not just a design choice, it is a moral one. It is a physical argument against hierarchy, a silent sermon on the dignity of every soul who gathers around it. My life's work has been to translate the grammar of silence into the language of structure, to build rooms that whisper, "You are welcome here," to every person who has ever been told, in word or deed, that they are not. Even in a sanctuary, memories have a way of slipping in like uninvited guests on a rainy night. There are moments still when the ghost of the old Beverly visits me. She is the one who craved a praise that never came, who measured her worth by the yardstick of their attention. She appears in the quietest hours, a faint ache, a whisper of the old hunger. I have learned not to fight her, but to offer her a chair by the fire. I let her sit and look around. I let her see the solidity of the beams, the vastness of the ocean, the gentle glow of the lamps I built with my own hands. I show her the stack of letters from women who found courage in her story. And slowly, her anxious form begins to relax. She sees that the little girl from the shed is not just safe. She is the architect of her own world. The craving for their approval is a phantom limb. You can still feel it, but you no longer need it to stand. The uninvited guest, once acknowledged, eventually rises, nods in a kind of peaceful surrender, and fades back into the past, leaving only the profound, quiet certainty of the present. Standing at the podium of my alma mater, looking out at a sea of young, hopeful faces, was a moment of perfect symmetry. I was invited to give the prestigious Alvarez Lecture, named for the teacher who first saw me. The topic was the ethics of load-bearing, designing for social responsibility. I spoke not just of physics, but of moral physics. I told them that every building they design is a statement of values. Does it isolate or connect? Does it empower or control? Does it have a head of the table, or is it a circle of equals? I saw in their eyes the same flicker of recognition I once felt in Miss Alvarez's classroom. After the talk, a young man with nervous hands approached me. "Miss Hart," he stammered, "your story, it's not just for women. It's for anyone who's ever felt like an accessory in someone else's story." He was right. The blueprint of belonging is universal. Leaving the hall, I felt the circle close. I was no longer just Beverly Hart, structural engineer. I was a link in a chain, passing on the tools, the language, the quiet, revolutionary act of building a fairer world, one thoughtful design at a time. My hands, so long accustomed to the cool certainty of steel and the grain of wood, have discovered a new language in the soil. I've planted a garden on the leeward side of the villa, a sheltered, sun-drenched bowl facing the sea. It is a messy, glorious, unpredictable counterpoint to the precise lines of my architecture. Here, I am not the master designer, but a collaborator with sun and rain and seed. I learn patience from the slow unfurling of a fern, resilience from the weeds that persistently return, and sheer, unadulterated joy from the first crimson tomato of the season. Chloe's daughter, my niece Laura, is my most eager apprentice. Her small, dirty hands carefully pat soil around seedlings, her questions a constant, delightful stream. Aunt Bev, why do worms like it here? Do flowers get thirsty? In teaching her, I am healing a part of my own childhood. We are not building a table, but we are cultivating a different kind of space, one of growth, of life, of shared wonder. It's a different kind of quiet revenge against the sterility of a life lived only for achievement, a reclaiming of softness, of dirt, of the simple, profound act of nurturing life. In the attic of the villa, I keep a single cedar-lined chest. It is my own personal archive, a museum of a quiet life. Here lies the first wobbly box I ever built. Here is the acceptance letter to university, the paper now thin and yellowed. Here are the first clumsy sketches of the villa, drawn on napkins and the backs of receipts. And here, nestled in tissue paper, is the last birthday card my mother ever gave me before the television show. A generic, store-bought thing signed with a hurried, "Love, Mom." I do not keep these things out of bitterness, but as benchmarks. They are the surveyor's stakes of my journey. To look at that box is to see the distance I have traveled. To hold that card is to feel the weight of what was, and the profound lightness of what I have built since. An archive is not a prison for the past. It is a foundation. It reminds you of the ground you broke, the materials you had to work with, and the sheer, staggering height of the structure you managed to raise from that humble, difficult earth. As the years have turned, I've added a new ritual to the Festival of Tables, the lighting of the lanes. As dusk settles on the cliff, every guest is given a lantern. We form a silent, flickering procession, walking the paths that wind through the property. We do not speak. We simply walk, our individual lights merging into a river of gold against the deepening blue of the evening. We are the forgotten, the overlooked, the quiet ones, and in this moment, we are luminous. We are a constellation of our own making. At the end of the path, we place our lanterns on the terrace wall, a blazing, silent tribute to the light we each had to kindle within ourselves. It is the most beautiful structure I have ever helped to create. Ephemeral, yes, but no less real than the house behind it. It is the visualization of our collective spirit, a temporary monument to the fact that from the deepest silence, the most brilliant light can emerge. Life has a way of introducing plot twists that a better writer than I could never have devised. Chloe, now a respected choreographer, proposed a collaboration, a performance piece called Structures. Her dancers would move through and interact with my architecture. I was skeptical. My work was about permanence, hers about fleeting moments. But as I watched the rehearsals, I saw a new dimension of my home emerge. A dancer's lean against a wall highlighted its solidity. A leap across the great room emphasized its soaring volume. Their bodies became a living, breathing critique and celebration of the space. Chloe explained it to me. Architecture is choreography frozen in time. Dance is architecture made fluid. In that moment, the old binary of us, the pragmatic engineer and the ethereal artist, dissolved completely. We were both builders, just using different materials. Our collaboration was the final, graceful knot tying together the disparate threads of our lives, proving that every structure, no matter how solid, is meant to be inhabited by movement, by life, by art. After decades of building on it, I have come to understand that the land is not a passive canvas. It is a conversation partner. The cliff has its own language, spoken in the shift of stones, the persistence of certain plants, the way water finds its path during a storm. I have learned to listen. I no longer see myself as its conqueror, but as its interpreter. My role was to translate its strength and its vulnerabilities into a form that could shelter human life without violating its essence. This deep listening has changed my work. My newer designs are even more organic, more responsive. They ask not, "What can I build here?" but "What does this land want to become?" This humility is the final evolution of my quiet revenge. It is no longer a rebellion against my family, but a harmonious dialogue with the universe. The ultimate justice is not domination, but integration. It is finding your note in the grand, silent symphony of the world and playing it with all the grace you can muster. Through my niece Lara's 10th birthday, I did not buy her a toy. I built her a toolbox, a small, perfectly scaled thing made of the same cedar as my great table. Inside, I placed a real lightweight hammer, a tape measure, a combination square, and a set of pencils. "This is not for decoration," I told her, kneeling to meet her gaze. "This is a set of keys. Keys to build whatever you can imagine. A birdhouse, a bookshelf, a future." Her eyes wide and serious. She didn't squeal with delight. She nodded, her small hand closing around the handle of the hammer with a look of fierce determination. In that moment, I saw the future more clearly than any blueprint could ever show me. The legacy was not the villa, not the company, not the television show. It was this, passing on the tools, the knowledge, the permission to create. It was ensuring that the next generation of girls would not have to steal moments in a leaky shed, but would have a toolbox of their own and the unwavering belief that they have every right to use it. A lifetime of lifting beams and kneeling on concrete has written its story on my body. My shoulders carry a permanent slope of effort. My knees predict the rain. For years, I saw these aches as weaknesses, flaws in the design. Now, I understand them as a different kind of archive. This stiffness is the memory of lifting the first sheet of glass for the Great Wall. This bake is the ghost of a long night spent securing a beam in a storm. My body is not betraying me. It is recounting the epic of its own labor. It is the living, breathing record of the house it helped to build. I have learned to listen to its wisdom, to move with a new, slower grace. This is not surrender. It is a deepened conversation with the instrument that made all my dreams tangible. The body, too, is a structure, and it deserves the same respectful maintenance, the same patient understanding as any building I have ever designed. My table, once a solitary dream in a college notebook, has now extended across oceans. Through digital connections, my mentorship has expanded. I now counsel young architects in Mumbai, engineers in Sao Paulo, community activists in Nairobi. We are a global network of quiet revolutionaries sharing blueprints for libraries, schools, and community centers. We speak different languages, but we share a common grammar of equity and design. We are building a world where the head of the table is an obsolete concept, where every chair is a place of honor. My villa was the prototype, but the vision was always meant to be scalable, replicable, infectious. To see a rendering of a round community hall in a place I've never visited, designed by someone I've only met on a screen, is to see my quiet revenge blossom into a global garden. The work is no longer mine, it is ours. And that is the most beautiful structure of all. This morning, I awoke to a world transformed. A rare, quiet snow had dusted the cliffside, laying a soft, white blanket over the hardy ice plant and the sharp edges of the rocks. The ocean, a dramatic slate gray, churned against this newfound stillness. I stood at the glass wall, a cup of tea warming my hands, and watched the flawless white. There were no footprints, no marks of possession or design. It was a blank page. And for the first time in as long as I can remember, I felt no urge to build upon it. No compulsion to draw a line, to plan a structure, to improve upon the perfection of the moment. The great achievement of my life is not the ability to build, but the ability, finally, to simply be, to be still, to be content in the presence of a beauty I did not create and do not control. The quiet revenge has run its course. The need to prove, to assert, to build my worth into the world has quieted. What remains is a profound, unshakable peace. The silence is no longer something I design. It is a gift I receive. And so, the story finds its rest, not an ending, but a point of perfect equilibrium. The villa stands. The table is worn smooth from use. The garden blooms in its season. The tools have been passed on. I have built my world, and in return, it has built me. From the quiet girl in the shed, I became the woman on the cliff. I learned that silence is not a prison, but the space where the soul can draft its truest blueprints. That walking away is not losing, but making room for a better arrival. That the most powerful revenge is not a roar of destruction, but a lifetime of quiet, consistent creation. A table built, a light left on, a space held open for anyone who needs it. My name is Beverly Hart. I was forgotten, so I learned to remember myself. And in that act, I built a home for countless others. The hammer is still. The ocean breathes. The work is done.